and welcome to Growing Together in Grace. I'm Cathy.
I'm Ellen.
And we're so glad you're here with us for part 2 of our book reviews. The part 1 was Ellen's book on going public. Your children can thrive in the public school. In this episode, I will be sharing the 2 books that I read.
Yes. So, Cathy, tell me, you read 2 books, correct? Okay. So tell me what both of the authors' thoughts were about homeschooling. How did they feel about that? And do they homeschool?
Okay. So, yes, both do homeschool.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure that these 2 are actually good friends.
Okay.
In fact,
Oh.
you can actually see the foreword is by Sarah McKenzie.
Okay.
So she wrote the foreword in the book. And Sarah McKenzie wrote Teaching from Rest.
Oh, okay, cool. All right.
So, yes, they both homeschool. I don't know about Missy Winkler as far as her oldest children.
Okay.
Because I really just started reading her and following her not too long ago.
Okay.
But I've been following Sarah McKenzie for quite some time. She, I know, successfully has had a child graduate through homeschooling, is now very...
How many kids does this author have?
5 or 6.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And similar.
With the other one. Okay.
Sarah McKenzie's book on Teaching from Rest is probably, I think it's the first book I read on homeschooling.
Okay. And you mentioned when I was talking about my book, is that the book that you read every year?
Yes.
Okay.
I actually read just, when did this book come out? It's newer.
Okay.
Let me just look real quick. Okay, this book was written in 2021.
Okay.
So I read it the year that it came out.
Okay.
And ever since then, I read this in January, at the beginning of the school year.
Okay.
And then this book was written in 2015.
Okay. So that's an older book.
Yes.
Okay.
So I've been reading this, but I know that I didn't start reading it until a couple years after it had been published.
Okay.
But I've read it 5 years for sure, because I've read it 5 times.
So tell me why you like to read those books every year.
Great question. So Teaching from Rest, it's a great book in the sense of it doesn't say necessarily why she homeschools. Well, it does, because in the book she talks about how she starts off with, what is our goal and purpose of teaching our children? What do we want to cultivate within them?
Right.
And then as you brainstorm and think about that and you make your list, then your decision is easily made in the sense of, we want our kids to have a biblical worldview. Okay. Well, you're not going to get that in the public school system.
Right.
Not to say that parents who put their kids in the public school can't teach them the biblical worldview. You know what I'm saying? It's just a lot harder to do.
Yeah.
Right? Because, for example, at home, our school day starts off with us doing a family devotional. And we have a Q&A type of book where there's like a question about who is God?
Yeah.
What is man? What is sin? And we talk about that. Now, as the kids have gotten older, it gets into more lengthy types of discussions.
Right. Okay.
Well, my children aren't going to get that in the public school, right?
Yes. I would agree.
But, so all of that to say, for us, it came down to, well, I'll just read this quote because this is pretty much my heart. In the book, it's the true aim of education is to order a child's affections, to teach him to love what he ought and hate what he ought. Our greatest task then is to put living ideas in front of our children like a feast. We have been charged to cultivate the souls of our children, to nourish them in truth, goodness, and beauty, to raise them up in wisdom and eloquence. It is to those ends that we labor. So just taking that paragraph alone and knowing the education system, and you could probably say more about this, but so much of school now is teaching to the test. Like, we have to raise our test scores on the STAR test or the Iowa base.
I would agree with that.
We are like you're put in this box now. Like, there's not a freedom to like, hey, our children are really loving this. Let's go with this.
Yeah.
It's nope. We got deadlines. You can't do this. Right.
Yep. No, I agree.
Whereas in the homeschooling environment, because one, we don't have 25 children.
Right.
Or however many kids are in classrooms. And we have way more, like, we have less interruptions, less behavior issues, theoretically.
Yeah.
There are times where there are days where we have done like, okay, we're not doing this. We're done with school. Clearly our minds. That's not so much the case now.
Right.
But when they were little.
Yeah.
So we have a lot more freedom.
Yes.
To be flexible.
Yes.
And to like, okay, my child is all about this right now.
Yeah.
Let's be all about this right now.
Yeah.
So there's not that pressure from state standards and the government coming in and all of those things. And then the other aspect of that is it always felt like, at least even for me when I went to public school and in private school, there was never built within me this curiosity just to love to learn and explore. It was, you have to memorize these things so you can do well on this test. Whereas we wanted to cultivate within our children a love for learning.
Yeah.
And I felt like that would not happen.
Yeah.
In the public school system.
I mean, I understand your feelings on that, you know, being a public school educator. I mean, you are right in those things that, you know, there seems to be, because teachers, educators are also tired of the fact that I know the upper grades feel like they teach the test. After January, when we come back from break, it's like test mode, you know, and there are some school districts that actually, your evaluation as a teacher, your test scores affect that evaluation.
Right.
So that's even more pressure on the teacher. And I hate that, because you brought up a good point, because when I started teaching 17 years ago, that was not really the case. I mean, yeah, we still did standardized testing, but it wasn't that big of a deal. You know, we as teachers still had the freedom to be able to do some of the things and not be on this rigid schedule. I mean, you're right. And, you know, I can see that.
Now, that's not to say that, like, because I have friends whose children are public school and they're part of a great public school system. But some of those public schools are like more like charter or magna type schools, you know what I mean? So they're a little different. But, and their kids love to learn.
Yes.
And that's part of like what they're seeing modeled at home as well.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to create an environment where my kids, like, I was just thinking about this the other day. Josh was fascinated by our science lesson. And normally, like in a school setting, you have like, this is the time that's allowed for science. And then we're done.
And you're teaching them this area. And it has to be done in so many days. Yeah. And we're moving on.
So, but in our home, like, okay, he's so fascinated with this right now. I'm going to let him run with it.
Yeah.
Like, and so he would like research and watch YouTube videos, or we would talk about it, or we would do an experiment, or we would check, or we check out books.
Yeah.
Like, we just got to expand on it. So that's one of the big reasons why homeschooling was so important to me, because I had taught in the school system and I saw where it was heading.
Yeah.
But I also wanted the opportunity to work and teach my children the biblical worldview perspective.
Yeah.
That I knew they wouldn't get in the public school system.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the beauty things too in homeschooling. Like, our science curriculum is solid, and we are taught in our science curriculum. They mention evolution, that's talked about, but then the authors of our science curriculum will say, here's why this is not biblical.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Well, they wouldn't get that in the public school system.
Right. Right.
So that was a huge deal for me, at least for the first several years of their life.
Yeah.
But now that, at least with Joshua, I mean, he will be going to homeschool classes. And so he's still taking courses that are from a Christian biblical worldview perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But in his classroom, there's several people who come from different walks.
Yeah.
And different denominations. And so there's going to be that aspect of, oh, that's interesting that you think that way. Well, this is what I was raised to believe and think or whatever. So, and the part of why we're doing that is, okay, it's only a it's like a university model based homeschool. So he goes there 2 days a week and then the rest of the week he's at home studying and doing his work.
Yeah.
And so he's still homeschooling in the sense of he's home for the most part. And I'm able to help him as much as I can.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So that, because I didn't want him to be, not that there's anything wrong with this, I just felt convicted. I didn't want him to be homeschooled from home all the way through and then be like, here, go to college.
Yes.
I wanted him to have experience with other teachers, other expectations from other people.
Yeah.
And I felt like high school was the right time to start that with him.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Plus, I also was like, oh, Jason, I'm not sure I can teach Joshua to the level that he wants to be taught and parent a toddler and parent a newborn.
Yeah.
So
I feel like that'll be good for him.
I think so too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Evangeline wants to stay home for another year at least, which is fine because she's my right hand lady.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not ready to let her go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to say that Josh
she's
was
a good big sister.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I will say this, teaching from rest, one of the main reasons why I read it every year is because it reaffirms to me why I'm teaching my children, why I'm homeschooling. It reminds me that as I'm homeschooling, that I'm resting in Christ's work and that I'm like, because I have a tendency to like overanalyze and overthink and over worry and like, what if I mess up? What if she reminds us all throughout this little book. It's only 88 pages, so it's a quick read of resting in Christ's work. If you are working for the Lord and you're doing it to glorify him and you are praying for the Spirit to work in and through you, just rest and know that you're doing exactly what God has called you to do. Yeah. And so that perspective has really like, okay. And so it's kind of like a check mark for me too.
Well, it takes your anxiety away of whether or not you're doing it right, you know, and I like that.
She says in one of her chapters that builds off of this idea that God asks us to live excellently. That is, he asks us to live in simple, obedient faith and trust. He asks us to faithfully commit every day to him and then to do that day's task well. He's the one who's in charge of the results.
Yes.
So that is kind of like my model of, okay, all he's asked of me is to teach my children.
Yeah.
Okay. So what does that look like? Yeah. How do I make that happen in our family? Because that's the other thing about homeschooling that's beautiful. Everyone does it differently.
Yeah.
Jill, like our friend Jill, she and I homeschool differently. I have another friend who's about to start homeschooling. I'm sure she and I are going to homeschool differently.
Yeah.
You just figure out the rhythms that work for your family and you figure out how best to go about that to make your time work well. And so at the end, you're just like realizing you're a servant of the Lord. And all you're called to do is your job and trust the Lord to do the rest.
Yeah.
And so that's really why I like this. Another thing that I loved about this book is before reading her, I was still very public school minded and how I did education.
You taught in a public school for a couple of years.
I was like, we're going to do school from this time to this time and we're going to finish this. And was like, no, this isn't working. It's got to be different.
Yeah.
There's a reason why. There's got to be something different. So in here, she talks about how you simplify your homeschooling life and days and what that looks like. And so...
so would you recommend this read to somebody who is thinking about homeschooling?
Yes.
Is this something where, like,
Yes.
if they're going back and forth about it, would you say to them, read this book?
Yes.
This will put everything in perspective.
I would. I'd absolutely, because the first half is more like the encouragement of why and cultivating and letting God use you as a servant. And then the second half is how to simplify and how to work out your days and make your days work for you.
Yeah.
And, she gives sample schedules in her book and what that looks like, and talks about like looping curriculums. Like we don't do geography every year.
Gotcha.
Some of that's because my kids, like Joshua, knows geography backwards and forwards. So why am I going to continue geography with him?
Right.
Or even spelling. Like some, you do spelling in public school. Well, my kids don't really need to have a spelling curriculum because they are required to read and write. And as they write, we check their work. And if there's misspelling words, we highlight them and remind ourselves this is not spelled correctly. Let's figure out how to, you know what I mean?
Yeah. No.
So there's stuff like that.
Okay.
But she's phenomenal. She has a podcast. I follow her on Instagram.
So you listen to her podcast too? Okay.
She actually wrote the book, the Read Aloud Family. Mm-hmm. She's what you would actually appreciate following her, actually, since you're a reading specialist.
Yeah.
So I'll link her to your Instagram, and Facebook.
Yeah,
because she is always sharing her like a children's book of the week.
Oh,
this is a fantastic book, and here's why this is a great book. And she shares, and she has authors, like she's had well-known authors that on her podcast.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That you know of, not know.
Yeah.
But,
no, I would be like, oh, I know that person. Yes.
She is a great follow for read alouds.
Okay.
So
link her to my Instagram.
She's big on reading. Huge. And that is a passion of mine.
Cool.
She's also the lady who introduced me to several different like methods of homeschooling and what that looks like. And through her, I now do, I don't think she does Sabbath homeschooling, but I do Sabbath homeschooling, which I think I shared in our intro podcast on education. And that's basically, I teach for 6 weeks and then I take a week off, and that week off, the kids use to like catch up on things that they may have gotten behind on.
Yeah.
And then I use that week to plan. I've already planned, but to like get everything gathered for the next 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And then I also will use it for like house projects that just fell through the cracks because we were busy homeschooling. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I love her for that aspect of just teaching me how to like simplify my life.
Yeah.
And how to rest in Christ's work and let him take care of the rest.
Okay,
so that's this book.
Okay.
Like I said, it is a short book that I highly, highly recommend. And it's often recommended in several, like I'm in a couple homeschooling groups, Christian and non-Christian, and both recommend this.
Okay.
Which is interesting to me that in the
a non-Christian. Okay.
It's interesting.
Very cool. Okay.
So that's Teaching from Rest by Sarah McKenzie.
Okay.
I'm sure I could say a whole lot more, but I don't want to overshare.
It's only 88.
Instead, you should go read this book. It's so great.
Very cool.
So that's Teaching from Rest.
Okay. And then this one.
Okay, here's why I love this one. This one's got more like a devotional type feel to it because it is 30. Let me just look. Yeah, 30.
Interesting.
There are 30 short chapters.
So it's like a devotional for homeschool mom, or?
It's not really I say devotional because when you think of devotionals, they're like 3 pages.
Yeah, and then you have like questions to reflect on.
So there are questions at the end of each chapter.
Okay.
Like 3 reflective questions.
That center around homeschool.
Yes.
Okay.
Some of it's more like, let me just see if I can flip this open to the chapters. Okay, so this is in this book has 3 parts. Part 1 is on guilt. Part 2 is on grace, and then part 3 is on gratitude.
Okay.
And so all throughout the book, she is talking about like chapter 1 was on ideals. Well, what are your ideals? Do you have ideals? And if you don't end up like making them, like if I had this ideal of I want my homeschool day to look like this.
Yeah.
But one day it doesn't look like that. Don't let that wear you down and make you feel bad and terrible because ideals are great to have, but we need to be more flexible and understanding. But it's good to have ideals. So a lot of this book is more encouraging the homeschooling mom to keep fighting and to keep persevering and to keep doing the hard work.
Yeah.
Okay. She
is this a book that you would also recommend to people who are homeschooling?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
She also talks a lot about like knowing where you're heading in your education. Because sometimes people just jump right in and they don't have
a plan
or a vision or a thought. But when you know what you're aiming for, you can really thrive towards that. You know what I'm saying?
Now, I have talked with homeschool parents that have decided to homeschool their children, and when they explain the homeschooling, I'm like, I asked the question, so how many what curriculum is best? You know, like how does that work? And I always get this, you know, like different answers, like it depends on what you want for your kids.
Yeah.
You know, you can go to homeschool because you do like conferences and conventions and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an overwhelming amount of curriculum out there for homeschool families.
Mm-hmm.
Even like places where you can do part school, part homeschool. There's so many options.
Yeah.
And for somebody who doesn't know the different options, I can see where it's overwhelming. So I like the fact that you have these 2 books, like kind of as, okay, well, here's kind of your guide. It's kind of like my book. Like, well, I don't know if I want to put my child in public school. Well, here's some of the reasons why. It's the same type of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's interesting we're talking about this because a friend of mine is going to start homeschooling this fall. Actually, Tiffany.
Yeah. Okay.
She is going to start homeschooling this fall. And so, you know, she's been asking Jill and I several questions.
Yeah.
And as a first-time homeschooling mom, it is overwhelming. Like, there's so much
I'm
out there
overwhelmed
now.
when my friends tell me how they do it. And I have so many different people that I know that do it different ways.
Yes.
And I'm like, I don't know if I could do that, you know?
And there's so much curriculum out there.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many co-ops, like you've said, out there. There's philosophies and even how to, like, are you Charlotte Mason? Are you classical education? Are you unschooled? There's so much. And so that's why in this book, at the very beginning, she talks about find your target, you and your family.
All the friends that you know that homeschool, they do theirs differently.
Yes. Right? I have friends that homeschool straight from home.
Yeah.
Not many.
Okay.
But I have friends that do it all from home. I have friends that do something similar to what Joshua will be doing, where they go twice a week and learn, and then they come home, and the rest of the time that they're home, they're doing the schoolwork that's been assigned to them. I have friends that do, and I did this for 2 years, classical conversations. It's a one-day thing.
I've heard of classical conversations.
Where you go for a day, and you're there for part of a day, and then the rest of the week you're learning that material, and a lot of parents supplement with that. And so, yeah, there's a ton. There's a ton.
Ooh.
But that's why it's so important. If you were thinking about, and this is for our listeners, if you're thinking about homeschooling, my recommendation is always to try to start reading a couple of books first.
Yeah.
And these two are great books to start off with.
Yeah.
So that you can kind of get an idea. And then not just books. Like for me, my biggest encouragement and help throughout my entire homeschooling journey is having two groups of friends. The friends that are starting out.
Yeah.
So that we can do this together and encourage each other. And the friends that have already done it and have been successful.
Yeah.
And so I was fortunate enough that at our previous church, I knew several homeschooling families. And so they were helpful.
Yeah.
And then my older sister she has a son older than my son. So she started off homeschooling a little bit before I did. So I had her. And then the conventions, the homeschooling conventions are fantastic.
You guys have support groups too, right? Parent support groups. Okay, cool.
So yeah, it can be overwhelming, but if you find the right people, and you start reading and preparing and thinking through these things, and always going to a convention,
Now, homeschool is not a traditional. I mean, because our kids did public school. My husband and I are both educators. We had the typical school year. We started on this day. We had so many breaks, and then we got out for the summer. Obviously, homeschooling is different. Like, your schedule is different. Like, do you guys do a typical, quote unquote, would you follow a school year with a public school?
So
or do you do it
I
differently?
don't. And it's different for every family.
Every family.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have friends that take off the summer because they're like, nope, I'm taking the summer. I need the break.
Yeah. Yeah.
I homeschool year round.
Okay.
But because I do Sabbath school, I do a Sabbath school method, meaning I teach for 6 weeks. I have a week off. I teach for 6 weeks. I have a week off. Now, in between those, I do plan to make sure that I'm off the week of Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And then I'm off the last 2 weeks at Christmas time because Jason is off. And so whenever Dad is off, we're off.
Yeah.
So that we can be together as a family.
Do you homeschool when you do vacations? I know some people who
I'm only laughing.
Do that.
I'm only laughing because it depends on what you mean. There are definitely times when we've gone on trips. I'm like, come here, guys. Come read this. We're gonna learn. Like, Mom, we're on vacation. I'm like, that's fine. We're here. We're gonna learn.
Yeah. Because I do know some people who homeschool, but they still, if they go on vacation, they're like, oh no, we have time carved out. We're gonna do homeschool.
So I'll say this: there have been times, for instance, in February we went to Colorado with Jason's parents.
I remember that.
Well, Joshua had math. He could have done this. So he had math class every Thursday.
Yeah.
He's now getting private tutor through your former math teacher.
Yeah.
Which is funny. So we left and we're gone for a week, which meant either he'd come home from our vacation and would have 7 math assignments to do in like a 3-day period.
And with that former math teacher, that's a lot.
So that could have been his option.
Yeah.
Our suggestion to him was to bring his textbook and his math work.
Yeah.
And in the evenings when we would be back at the cabin, because we have little ones who need to go to bed early, do his math work. So he brought his work while we were on vacation.
Okay.
But that was during the school year. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there are times where it's like that.
Okay.
Now, excuse me, like at Christmas, I really try not.
I gotcha.
Like I want him to have a break. And then in the summer, I take off the month of July.
Okay.
And the first 2 weeks in August. So there's like a 6-week period where there's no new anything.
Yeah.
because I'm using that time to plan and prep for the next school year.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean my kids are still required to read 20 minutes a day.
Okay.
And it could be my oldest hates reading fiction. He wants all nonfiction, informational type of books. I'm like, you've got to read fiction. I know you don't want to, but you have to do that because you're going to, he's going to be in for a surprise this coming school year.
Yeah. I always think fiction is good reading wise because kids have a better connection to be able to make and put themselves in different situations that characters are in.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Into my reading mode teacher here. But yeah.
Whereas my daughter will read fiction all day long.
And then you also need to get some informational text in there so you
like,
learn.
Oh, do I have to read them? Like, yes, you actually have to read this.
Yeah. Yes, dear.
But Josh was like his dad. Jason rarely reads fiction. Now, if I keep bugging him, like, you've got to read this. You've got to read this. He'll read it.
Yeah.
But he, for the most part, is a nonfiction reader, which is fine. People like their thing.
See, my husband is fantasy fiction. He can't read nonfiction books.
Oh, Jason,
sometimes.
That's all Jason reads.
And I'm just like, can you just read this book? It's a really good book.
Joshua is very much his father. Like if Jason, there was one year, like it still happens, but there was one year Jason was all about Vikings. I don't even know why. And all he did was read books about Vikings. I'm like, what? Like what? And then there was another year. It was after our trip to like South Dakota. We did like an Oregon Trail trip in a couple states.
Yeah.
He was all about buffalo and the Wild West. So he read. I was like, That's how Joshua is. Okay. Whereas Evangeline, I was like, did you read this? Have you read this? Please tell me you've read it. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So I'm loving that Evangeline's getting to the point now where she and I can read. There's some books that I read that she's not quite ready to read yet.
Yeah.
I like for the maturity aspect, right?
Yeah.
But there are some books I'm like, yes, read this. I want to talk to you about this. Read this book. So I love that.
See, I love that. Yeah. See, I love that.
So in this book also has like chapters on like, there's a chapter about sin, reminding us that we can't keep sin away. Like we're sinful people.
Yeah.
And so reminding ourselves that there are going to be days in our homeschooling where our child lies to us. And how do we go about dealing with that and working with that, or cheats, or
the same thing in public school too. Things that they need to learn. Yeah.
Accountability. There's a chapter on accountability and making sure that you are sticking with it and not being lazy and relaxed and making sure your children are doing the same.
Yeah.
Because at some point in homeschooling, you start to let go some to let them guide how they. So like my two older children, at the end of each week, they have one piece of paper, and on that piece of paper, it tells them what all has to be done for the week.
Yeah.
My oldest, I don't hound him anymore because he's going to be a freshman. I don't need to, and some of it is I've never really had to hound him. He's so task oriented.
Whereas your daughter.
So this is what you have to have done. And then on Fridays, I check it.
Yeah.
So for accountability, I check, did you finish it? And if it's not finished, then they get to spend the weekend doing it. And oftentimes my daughter will be mad and frustrated. It's like, do your work. And it's not a lot of work. Like I tell my kids this, I'm like, if you would get up and shower and have your breakfast and start your work, I'm telling you, you would be done by 1.
And then you have the whole day.
Yeah, they would be done by 1. And now that's going to be different for Joshua this year. He's going to be working. Bless his heart. Oh, well, I don't know.
But it'll be good for him, though, because it's a different aspect that he's learning.
Yeah.
And that'll be good for him because, he's growing.
And, he loves, my daughter loves learning too, but he really obsesses sometimes over learning. And so I think he'll be fine. But so a lot of this book hits topics like accountability, or it talks about curriculum and what that looks like. And
how many chapters is that book?
It's 30.
30. Ooh. Really?
Mm-hmm.
How?
But they're short. They're like
short
3
chapters.
pages.
Okay, gotcha. I know sometimes chapters, I'm like, that's not a chapter.
So
or, this is more than a chapter.
I guess the best way to describe the difference between these 2 books is this one is more like the practicality, like what does the homeschooling day look like? How can you make it simple?
Okay.
And then what's your purpose and reason? And this one is more hitting all the topics from sin to temptation to peace to patience, how to be patient and kind. And then at the end of every chapter, there's usually 3. It looks like
reflective questions.
3. Each chapter has 3 reflective questions.
Okay. And are you done with that book, or are you still reading through that book?
I am finished.
Okay. Cool. All right.
So I usually read this one in January.
Okay. And that is another book that you've read.
Yes. Multiplying. And why I do this one in January is because homeschooling starts for us in August.
Okay.
And so by January, we've been doing school for 4 months?
Mm-hmm.
So this encourages me.
Yeah.
To like, hey, Mama, I'm going to encourage you and remind you why you're doing what you're doing.
Yes.
I'm going to remind you that your child is not perfect, and let's keep them accountable, and let's remind them of these things. And so this is why I do this in January.
Yes.
And then this one I do right before each homeschool year, like a couple weeks before. Like I'll probably start this. I may, in fact, read this
while you're
I'm in the hospital.
While you're in the hospital recovering from your C-section.
Yes. Because it's a quick, it's an afternoon read for me. And this is just to refresh my mind of, okay, keep it simple, Cathy. Rest in Christ. Let him do the results.
It's a reminder of why you're doing homeschooling and the reasons why you're doing homeschooling. I love that.
So both are great books.
Thank you for sharing. So if you're thinking about homeschooling, those are the 2 books that you definitely recommend.
And here are the because it's going to be, here are the covers.
Yeah. Yes. I love that.
Sometimes I find this book, I've found this once at Goodwill.
You find a lot of good books at Goodwill. This girl can find books everywhere. I'm not kidding you. It's almost every time I come over. Hey,
I got a book for you.
I got a book for you. Just like, oh my God. But she picks out the best books. I have enjoyed pretty much every single book you have given me.
To be fair now, I love this about Evangeline. She loves going thrifting too.
Aww.
And so usually it's the funniest thing. We'll go, the boys hate it. So I'm like, you guys stay home and
hate shopping. I know mine hates
shopping. Play Switch or something. They have like a soccer game on the Switch.
Yeah.
I'm like, y'all play Switch. We're going to Goodwill. And Dorothy comes sometimes with us, but oftentimes lately it's been during her nap time.
Oh, okay.
But Evangeline and I will go into Goodwill, and she'll get her cart and I'll get my cart, and we divide and conquer. So she'll go straight to the book section and start looking through the children's section first. And then I will go to like the kitchen knick-knack area to see if there's anything that jumps out at me. I'm like, this is cool. And then I'll go to the furniture section because I'm trying to figure out we really want to make the inside of the tree house like a fun.
They have a tree house.
It's pretty cool.
Outside.
It's pretty cool.
I want to go play in it.
So we're trying
I could probably fit in there.
You can actually. We're trying to make it like a fun hangout spot.
That is cool.
And so I'm like, if I find stuff at Goodwill that's hardly anything price wise as far as like furniture, we'll do it that way.
Yeah.
And then she'll come with her cart loaded with books. And then I'll go through them like, oh, that's a great book. And I'll put it in my cart.
Yeah.
No, not that book. And then so she goes back to the books and puts the books we say no to back on the shelf. And then I'll go to the books, and then she'll go look at clothes.
Oh, my goodness.
And so I'll look through the chapter books. And that's where I do. I find a lot of great books.
Wow.
And so I'm like, oh, this is a great book.
I know, and a lot of times I'm like, how much do I owe you?
No.
Oh, nothing. I got it at the thrift store. Really? I think you got that one.
I did.
That you gave to me at the thrift store.
So, and that's the
I have
other
several
thing.
books. Yeah.
This may be nerdy, but I have a list of books that I printed off. Because like there'll be times where I go through, I'm like, this book sounds familiar, and then I'll check my list real quick. I don't always like check the list because if it's a book, I'm like, yeah, I know nothing about this book, or like doesn't register to me.
Yeah.
I'm like, eh. But if I'm like, this sounds familiar, and I'm like, oh, I've been wanting this book. I found it, and so we'll put it in the cart.
Honey.
So yeah,
You're so funny.
I hardly ever buy new now. Now, I had to buy new with that historical romance because it's a new series. I shared it a couple weeks ago.
Is that the one? Okay. Is that the one that you just shared?
The one that I just shared, I bought brand new too. But no, that is not a historical romance. It's a fantastic book though. So good. Oh, so good.
I'm telling y'all, this is the go-to person. Anything. And we always, that's another thing we probably need to mention. We have been off on posting on our page.
Yes.
Like her family's been sick. We've been out of town. They've been out of town. So we're going to get back on track.
Yes.
No more sickness, please, Lord.
Yes. Yes.
And then when she has baby, I'll take over the page for it.
No, I mean, I can help with the page still. I'm literally going to be in bed. So I need something to do.
Yeah. So we are going to keep on trying to record until she has baby. And we're still going to release like 2 episodes a month or something like that. And we're coming, guys.
We are coming.
We have one that we still need to edit.
Actually, Jason just finished it today.
Okay, cool.
So it will be released next week.
Yes. Yeah. So, we've just had life happen.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
It is okay.
Yeah. But we're still here.
We are. We're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Unless Facebook bans us or something.
Yeah. No, that's not going to happen.
I don't know why we would be banned though. We're too fun.
Yes. And we're pretty good. So, we're not bad.
I love how and we're pretty good.
We're pretty good. I think we are.
Anyway, well, that's the end of my books. Unless you had any other questions. I don't.
I mean, you shared what they were about, and I asked you, are these the books that you could recommend? And so good.
All right, ladies. Well, thank you for joining us for part 2 of our book reviews on education.
Yes.
We are growing together in grace, and I'm Cathy.
I'm Ellen.
And we will talk to you later.
Bye, ladies.
Bye.